Have you ever caught yourself doing the mental math at a restaurant, counting in your head whether you can order the pricier dish, even though you have the money in your account? Or felt that small tightening in your chest after buying something you genuinely wanted? That behavior is typical of people who see the world through scarcity lenses, people who count pennies not because they truly lack money, but because they viscerally believe everything is limited and could run out at any moment. They carry a constant, low-grade fear that there will never be enough. Today I will dissect the mind of those people. I will show you how this pattern of thinking is not an innocent personality trait, but a powerful mental mechanism that shapes financial reality. You will see clearly why this mind becomes a prisoner of its own thought, and how that creates a loop the universe simply mirrors and amplifies. I will reveal not only how this pattern works behind the scenes of your consciousness, but also the first concrete step to break the scarcity cycle you built yourself. I will show you how to start making space for the abundance that was always available, but that you keep refusing to see. So tell me, are you one of those people who sees limited resources at every corner of life? The answer to that question will determine where we go next. That scene at the restaurant is not small. It is diagnostic. When I see someone freeze at the menu, counting cost in their head, I hear a whole history whispering under those calculations. I hear fear dressed as prudence. I hear an identity that has trained itself to expect shortage. This is where I begin my examination. At first, they tell themselves a story that sounds wise. They say they are realistic or responsible. They wear those words like armor. They say they are protecting themselves and their family. But the armor hides a wound. Under the armor is chronic contraction. Under the armor lives a constant readiness for disaster. They check their account more than once a day. They feel guilt when they spend on pleasure. They hesitate to invest in themselves. This is not caution. It is a posture of constant shrinkage. They tell the outside world a different story. They say they are disciplined. They speak with a voice of virtue about sacrifice. They might even criticize those who waste money. They like to be seen as sensible. It makes them feel morally superior. It cushions a secret shame they cannot say aloud. That shame says, I am not safe. I am not permitted to relax. I do not deserve the ease others enjoy. Inside, the narrative sounds different. In private, they run a monologue that is punitive. It goes like this: if I relax, I will be punished. If I enjoy now, I will pay later. If I take the leap, I will fall. These sentences are small and venomous. They shape the muscles of decision. They tilt posture, tighten breathing, and make opportunities look like traps. The voice is quiet. It is relentless. You have to understand the subtle theater here. This person believes they are protecting themselves. They believe their vigilance is proof of care. But vigilance has become habit. Habit has hardened into identity. I have watched this morph many times. A habit of saving becomes a lifestyle of denial. A daily check of the bank balance becomes an addiction. The result is predictable. Behavior is the honest thing about a person. Words are often lies. So watch the actions. I watch how they react to a raise. They receive extra money and instinctively narrate new taxes, new risks, new reasons to distrust. They put the money away like it is lethal. They refuse to upgrade their life. They refuse to buy a small comfort that would actually increase their sense of worth. The logic is consistent. If money is dangerous, keep it caged. But caged money does not grow the courage to use it well. I remember a client named Anna. She worked late and saved obsessively for 10 years. She had modest investments and a rigid budget. When she finally sold a side project and had an unexpected bonus, she cried in disbelief. Not because she was joyful, but because she felt she had stolen something. She returned most of it to savings within days. She told herself it was smart. She told me she felt relief for a day and shame the next. Her body never learned to receive. That story is common. It teaches me what I must say clearly. This is not about numbers. It is about permission. These people tend to compare upward or sideways depending on the mood. Sometimes they despise those who spend freely. Other times they admire them secretly. The admiration feels like a betrayal. Either reaction feeds the same loop. You are separate from plenty. You are either the guardian against it or the righteous critic of it. Both roles avoid the real work, changing the inner architecture that makes abundance feel like a threat. The image they project in public and the script they repeat at night are both survival strategies. One is social, the other is private. One protects reputation, the other protects a brittle sense of self. Neither heals the root fear. And the root fear is always a story that began earlier. It might be childhood scarcity. It might be shame around being seen. It might be a parent's loud warnings about money. Whatever its form, it lodged in the nervous system and taught the body to expect scarcity as reality. When the person speaks of being realistic, notice the tone. It is not neutral. It carries relief and smugness. It is the relief of someone who has a script that absolves them. I am sensible translates to, I am safe inside my small cage. That sentence is a self-soothing spell. But spells are not strategies. A spell keeps you small by design. Now look at risk and opportunity. The scarcity mind interprets risk differently. It says risk equals danger. It rarely calculates expected value. It calculates threat. An opportunity that would require discomfort becomes evidence of the world's hostility. So the person delays. They research for months. They wait for conditions that will never arrive. This is not prudence. This is fear masquerading as prudence. Think about the effect on relationships. People who live like this often hoard attention and approval the way they hoard money. They resist vulnerability. They withhold celebratory spending with partners. They avoid invitations that cost money. They build a private life of small pleasures and public life of tight control. Intimacy decays. There is a slow erosion of surprise, of generosity, of risk-taking that connects two humans. The cost is emotional as well as financial. There is a cultural angle here too. Many of these minds argue from moral high ground. Money corrupts, they say. We must not worship it. I have no desire to argue the ethics of wealth. My point is practical. When your ethical posture is used to avoid joy, it is being weaponized against you. Morality becomes a leash. You must ask, are your values serving life, or are they serving your fear? This pattern also shows up in career choices. People steeped in scarcity often stay in stable jobs even when those jobs hollow them. They refuse to invest in courses, in mentors, in experiments. They trade long-term growth for short-term safety. The irony is brutal. What they believe protects them staying put is exactly what keeps them small. Opportunities that require upfront investment are dismissed because the mind refuses temporary exposure. Let me be blunt. Control is different from competence. Competence expands options. Control closes them. A person who believes they must control every cent cannot see growth as a process. Growth looks like loss until it is not. The scarcity mindset cries at the smell of loss and freezes. Over time, the freeze becomes a form of slow death. I once worked with a man named Carlos who had a small consultancy. He feared hiring help because he obsessed over payroll. He did everything himself. His business plateaued. He spent years saving the same amount of money while burning himself out. When he finally dared to hire an assistant, he realized the business could scale. The first month, the assistant cost more than Carlos thought it would. The business income within 3 months doubled. What changed was not the market. It was Carlos's willingness to let money move through him. He had been clipping the wings of his own enterprise with his fear. This is the contradiction at the center of the whole problem. They use scarcity language to seem responsible, but their behavior is consistently contraction. They preserve capital in the short term, but lose momentum long term. They trade living for safety. It is a poor bargain. You must know how contagious this internal posture is. When someone contracts to protect themselves, they send a signal. It affects the people around them. Families mimic the tension. Partners adopt the caution. Kids learn to value fear. The person becomes a small center whose gravity erodes expansion around them. The realistic, person becomes a cultural depressant in their circle. So how do these people actually live day to day? They wake up early. They check accounts. They make lists of risk. They cut pleasures. They become masters of small economies. They excel at optimizing the wrong things. Their lives are efficient but often joyless. They are excellent at surviving, not at thriving. There is a social face to this too. They can be very persuasive about sacrifice. They can convert shame into moral narrative. They will tell younger people to be careful and praise frugality. It sounds sound until you live the result of decades of that advice. You realize safety did not breed fullness. It bred a careful version of life. What I want you to notice is this. There is a difference between being poor and being a scarcity mind. Poverty is a condition. Scarcity mentality is a program the mind runs. I have seen wealthy people with scarcity minds and poor people with abundance minds. Money on the balance sheet does not equal freedom in the nervous system. When I speak of abundance, I do not mean reckless spending. I mean a posture that trusts life enough to let resources flow. I have seen people rebuild their inner permissions. They begin small. They learn to spend in ways that feel nourishing. They practice receiving. That practice rewires expectation. Rewiring does not mean blind optimism. It means shifting the axis of decision from fear to possibility. From what if I lose this to what doors could open if I allow this. That shift is not obvious. It is subtle. It begins inside a single transaction. It grows in tiny acts of authorization. Here is a test I use with people I coach. I ask them to spend a small amount on something that brings joy, not selfishly, but as a test, to truly watch what inner voice appears. Notice the thoughts, name them, then say something else internally and repeat the act next week. The point is not the money. The point is to watch the old story reveal itself and to practice choosing differently. That is the start of change. By now you should be seeing that the prudent self-image is actually a complex avoidance. It gives an identity. It gives control. It gives excuses. But it also constructs the very reality it fears. The more you protect against lack, the more you manufacture lack through closed choices. This is the cruel logic. And the cruel logic is reinforced by selective attention. The scarcity mind has a filter. It sees evidence of lack and ignores abundance. If something good happens, it finds reasons why it was temporary. If something goes wrong, it treats it as confirmation of the original thesis. Confirmation bias is the engine of this whole apparatus. This brings us to a crucial point. The pattern is adaptive and consistent. It is not random. It is organized. It is a strategy that worked at some point. But what served survival now sabotages life. That is why a diagnosis is necessary before any attempt to change. You cannot fix what you do not name. In the next part, one will unpack the different faces this pattern takes. It is not the same in everyone. The voice of scarcity wears different masks. You may be one where you recognize yourself immediately, or you may find traits of 2 or 3 masks inside your own behavior. That discovery will be uncomfortable. It will also be clarifying. And that clarity is the first step toward a different life. The scarcity pattern does not wear a single face. It wears many. I want you to hear 4 of the most common faces I meet. I will describe each one as I see it. I will show a day in their life. I will name the belief that runs their decisions. I will show what life tends to be like when that belief dominates. If you listen honestly, you might recognize yourself in one of them. You might recognize pieces of each. The first face is the perpetual survivor. This person moves through life like a storm could arrive at any second. Their core sentence is, "What if everything I depend on disappears tomorrow?" It is a sentence that animates almost every decision. It makes them stockpile. It makes them say just in case about everything. For them, a bonus is not a blessing. It is a test. A raise is a prelude to loss. A typical day for the perpetual survivor begins with early news checks. They look for threats. They scan headlines for job losses and market downturns. They walk through their apartment and count physical resources. When the rent is paid, they breathe briefly and then catalog what could go wrong next. At work, they avoid risks that could expose them. They accept extra shifts rather than invest in training. When an opportunity to partner on a project arises, they say, "I must think about it," and then never decide. In relationships, they are hypervigilant. They read other people's behaviors as potential threats. They keep emotional distance under the justification of not getting hurt. The perpetual survivor is exhausted. They do not sleep easily. They live in a low-level panic that is normalized as being sensible. The belief beneath it sounds protective, but its consequence is a life lived under continuous threat lighting. The person builds small safety nets that strangle possibility. If you see yourself here, understand, you are not simply cautious. You are practicing a catastrophe script. This script will be self-fulfilling unless you write a different ending. The second face is the obsessive accountant. This one worships numbers. They know every category of spending in obsessive detail. They can tell you how much they spent on coffee last year to the cent. They keep spreadsheets. They set rules that feel like law. Their identity is control through bookkeeping. A day in their life looks like a ledger. They plan purchases months ahead. They negotiate discounts until the pleasure is gone. They justify tightness as stewardship. When a friend suggests a weekend away, the obsessive accountant calculates opportunity cost until the weekend no longer appeals. They pride themselves on being responsible, and they look down on those who waste money. The belief driving the obsessive accountant is, "If I do not watch every penny, the world will take everything." This is their safety principle. The problem is that vigilance becomes a prison. The person learns to manage scarcity instead of expanding resources. They become good at conserving rather than creating. Their life often looks tidy and under control, and yet emotionally pale. The consequences are subtle but powerful. They avoid investments that don't have a guaranteed return. They miss collaborations because they are not sure the numbers will align. They experience a low-grade resentment toward people who take calculated risks and prosper. If you are this person, notice how mastery of accounting became an identity that reduces the range of your possible lives. The third face is the happiness postponer. This type promises themselves that joy will come later. When I have X in the bank, then I'll travel. When I have X saved, then I'll allow myself a better life. That X never stays fixed. It stretches as if set by elastic. Each success raises the bar for joy. A day for the happiness postponer is filled with deferred pleasures. They say yes to work invitations that pay now but steal later. They cancel small treats because it is not the right time. They file wish lists into invisible drawers labeled someday. When a real chance for pleasure arrives, they rationalize it away as irresponsible. Their future is always the place where life will be lived. The core belief here is transactional. Pleasure is conditional on perfect safety. That belief turns life into a postponement scheme. It steals experiences under the guise of prudence. Over time, the person gets proficient at surviving instead of savoring. Their memory becomes a list of postponed joys. Consequences are heavy. They may arrive at old age with savings and a thin history of actual enjoyment. They may recount choices with pride, but feel a persistent emptiness. If you hear this voice in you, ask, whom are you protecting by withholding now? Often the answer reveals a fear that enjoying now will somehow disqualify future security. That fear is not based on evidence. It is a habit. The fourth face is the guilty achiever. This one is unlike the others because they can and sometimes do prosper. But when they prosper, they feel like a fraud. They fear they have taken more than their share. They fear they have somehow wronged others by getting ahead. So they sabotage. They underprice their work. They refuse promotions that would make them stand out. Or they spend money in ways that secretly punish themselves. A day of the guilty achiever is full of ambivalence. On the phone, they close a profitable deal and then cancel the celebratory coffee. They buy a small luxury and feel nauseous afterward. They may donate to charity as a form of penance. Their generosity is often mixed with self-punishment. They want wealth, but cannot own it without guilt. The belief beneath this mask is moral prosperity. She was raised by parents who lived through real losses. She internalized scarcity early. In her 30s, she finally earned a salaried position that should have meant ease. Instead, she refused to spend on things that mattered. She later joined a small coaching group and began a simple practice. Once a week, she bought something for pure pleasure and sat with the feelings that came up. Each time she noticed the internal commentary, she named it. Over months, the commentary softened. The purchases did not lead to disaster. Her nervous system learned a new possibility. Receiving was safe. Her life shifted. Contrast that with Marco. Marco was an obsessive accountant who finally struck a contract that could triple his income. He froze and negotiated terms so aggressively, he lost the deal. He later reflected and realized his skill at managing numbers had become a tool to avoid risk. After working with a mentor, he practiced small hires and tested investments with limits. He failed at one, succeeded at another. The pattern loosened. The numbers began to serve creation rather than defense. These stories matter because they show a truth. Change is possible. The mind can learn a different script. The body can learn to feel safe with abundance. But the work requires naming the pattern and then practicing contrary actions. Now notice something else. Each subtype uses a form of logic to justify itself. The perpetual survivor uses worst-case scenarios. The obsessive accountant uses certainty as virtue. The happiness postponer uses future perfection as reason. The guilty achiever uses moral narratives about deserving. Each logic feels sane if you are operating from fear. Each logic becomes the barrier to the very thing the person says they want. There is an internal architecture behind the scenes. It consists of rules and rituals. Rules like never trust a windfall or always keep 3 months' expenses. Rituals like checking the bank every morning or refusing invitations. These rules and rituals are not neutral. They keep the pattern alive. They create a feedback loop where the mind finds evidence for its own thesis. This is why awareness alone rarely works. People learn the story. They nod. They want to change. But the automatic rituals keep running. You must move from insight to practice. You must interrupt the routine. That is the practical work. One way I map this for people is to ask, where's the rehearsal? Find the place where the pattern practices itself. Is it in your monthly budget? In your Sunday conversations about money? In how you react to offers? When you locate the rehearsal, you can stage an experiment. That experiment is a tiny action that conflicts with the old rule, but is safe in scale. This is how neural pathways change, not through sermons, but through repeated small disconfirmations. Now hear me. You may identify with more than one subtype. That is normal. Identity is porous. You can shift, but you must be honest with the pattern. You must be willing to trace where it began and then practice differently. That requires courage. It also requires tenderness. People who built these patterns were often protecting themselves from real trauma. We do not smear their story. We name it and then offer a method to change it. Before we close, I want to stress a point. None of these faces is morally bad. They are adaptive. They did something. They kept someone alive. The problem is when the adaptation outlives the threat. When the child's mechanism becomes the adult's governor, life narrows. That is the invitation of awareness, to free the adult from roles that were given to them when they were smaller. In the next section, I will show why all these faces answer to the same invisible law. I will explain how the mind's expectation becomes a magnet and why the universe reflects what you habitually emit. You will learn the mechanism that turns private fear into public reality. That explanation will be hard for some, liberating for others. But you need it to understand why the pattern is not merely psychological. It is also energetic and practical, and it always asks for a response. Which is why you must decide whether you will continue to wear the mask or begin to take it off. You have seen the faces. You have seen the gestures. Now I want to pull the curtain back and show you the mechanism that makes all those faces inevitable. I call it the law of mirroring scarcity. The name is blunt because the process is blunt. It is simple, mechanical, and merciless. It is the reason thinking realistically about money so often looks like wisdom while functioning like a slow-acting poison. Here is the law in plain terms. Your mind does not care whether scarcity is real. It only cares whether you expect it. Expectation sculpts physiology. Physiology shapes behavior. Behavior arranges life. If you habitually expect scarcity, your body tightens, your attention narrows, and your choices bend toward preservation rather than growth. The world then responds in ways that confirm your expectation. It is not mystical. It is coherence in motion. Let me show the anatomy of that coherence. A stimulus arrives, a job offer, a bonus, a business idea, a moment to enjoy. Your mind interprets. If you run a scarcity program, the interpretation is always hazard first. What if this doesn't last? What if I lose this? That question triggers a bodily state. Tight chest, shallow breaths, adrenal whisper. Those sensations feel like data. They feel like proof. But they are not evidence about the world. They are evidence about what you believe. That felt evidence generates an impulse. Most of the time the impulse is to delay, to ration, to audit, to prove you were right by refusing. Delay becomes research. Research becomes paralysis. Paralysis becomes opportunity missed. Missed opportunity becomes justification. You find external reason why your hesitation was correct. You file the experience away as smart caution. The loop closes. The law has done its work. The law works on 3 channels at once. First, perceptual filtering. Scarcity-trained minds look for lack and find it even in abundance. A raise becomes a tax preview. A surprise gift becomes a problem to be returned to safety. Second, emotional calibration. The nervous system learns to move toward contraction in financial contexts. It becomes what I call scarcity-prone physiology. That physiology makes options feel like threats. Third, behavioral reinforcement. Choices made from contraction produce outcomes that mimic scarcity. You hoard, you avoid, you underinvest. Those outcomes then feed back as proof that scarcity was real. Notice how tidy this is. The mind creates the atmosphere that justifies itself. The law is impartial. It returns what you habitually send. If you habitually transmit distrust toward flow, your life will mirror distrust. If you habitually permit flow, the world will answer with flow like signals. The universe is not punishing you. It is reflecting back the pattern you maintain. This is why intellectual insight alone rarely breaks the cycle. You can understand the logic in your head and still behave the same way. Why? Because the body remembers first. The body learned scarcity long before your conscious mind formed arguments for it. Your muscles, your breath, your gut carry that memory. You can lecture yourself for months and still revert to the old posture when money appears. So what does change require? Naming is necessary, but not sufficient. You must interrupt the coherence at its weakest point, the rehearsal. Every habit has a rehearsal. For a person steeped in scarcity, rehearsals are predictable. They are Sunday budget sessions that become moral liturgies. They are the morning balance check that mounts anxiety before the day begins. They are the private monologues that convert a pleasure into a crime. Find the rehearsal and you find the lever. Let me give a concrete map. Stimulus, interpretation, feeling, decision, ritual, outcome, proof. That is the machine. Each stage is a place to intervene. At stimulus, you can slow and name. At interpretation, you can choose an alternative meaning. At feeling, you can breathe and notice. At decision, you can take a small counteraction. At ritual, you can design a different rehearsal. Repeat new actions, and the outcome begins to shift. The proof then starts to accumulate in other directions. The law still holds. It simply mirrors a different pattern. I want to be clear about agency here. The law is not a judgment. It is not moral. It is a description of responsiveness. When you act from fear, your life will look like scarcity. When you act from allowance, your life will look like supply. The responsibility is not cruel. it is liberating. If the world reflects you, then you can change what you reflect. Let me show this with two quick images. Imagine caution grounded in possibility looks different from caution driven by panic. One pauses to plan. The other pauses to prove a fear. Learn the difference. Ask yourself, am I deciding from possibility or from threat? The physical answer is immediate. Notice your breath. Threat breath is truncated. Possibility breath is open. There are social dimensions too. Scarcity not only reflects, it recruits. When you act from lack, you signal it to others. Families align. Partners match tension. Teams shrink. The law cascades outward. I have seen households where one parent's secret anxiety about money became the household weather. Kids learn to anticipate lack. That pattern transmits across generations, not because of bank accounts, but because of felt habit. And yes, culture plays a role. Some moral narratives make scarcity look noble. Frugality as virtue can be honest until it becomes a leash. The law of mirroring scarcity doesn't care about your reasons. It only echoes the pattern. If frugality serves life, keep it. If it becomes the method by which you avoid receiving and risk, then it is a ritual that must be exposed. Now, before I move on to show how this law becomes a loop of self-sabotage, I will say something practical. Find one rehearsal this week. Notice when you check a balance, research an offer into paralysis, or convert a pleasure into guilt. Mark the moment. Do one tiny action that contradicts the rehearsal. Spend one small amount with full permission. Watch what you feel. Name the thought that accompanies the action. This is not therapy, it is calibration. The law will react. You will learn what you habitually send and begin to practice sending something else. You have to watch carefully because the law is patient. It will take time to show you a different mirror, but it will show it if you keep interrupting the old rehearsal. In the next part, one will show exactly how that interruption fails in practice for most people. I will show the loop in action. I will make it so clear that you will see yourself in it. I will describe 3 or 4 scenes where the law turns a smart decision into a missed chance. Pay attention because recognizing the loop is the step before breaking it. The loop looks almost ordinary. That is what makes it lethal. It does not arrive as a scream. It arrives as a tidy argument. It arrives as a careful plan. It arrives as prudence. Let me show you the loop in motion. I will show you 3 scenes. Each will be ordinary. Each will end predictably. When you watch these scenes, look for the micro moment where the decision could have tilted the other way. That is where most people fail. Scene 1. The raise. A direct deposit hits the account. The voice inside says, "This is temporary." You feel an odd tightness and immediately imagine tests. Extra tax, a job market shift, an expense you did not foresee. The reaction is to lock the money away. The person transfers the whole amount into savings and breathes relief. A month later, they note nothing has changed in their life. They say aloud, "See, I was right. It would have been risky to spend." The emotion that accompanies that sentence is smugness, not joy. Smugness is an anesthetic. It replaces pleasure with certainty. The raise was real. The life did not alter. The nervous system learned. Receiving is suspicious. Why does this matter? Because the decision not to spend a modest portion was not about prudence. It was about control. Control gives a temporary feeling of safety. Safety becomes identity. Identity becomes rule. The person begins to measure everything by the question, will this jeopardize my safety? Safety as supreme value crushes growth because growth requires temporary exposure. Scene 2. The opportunity to start. An idea shows up that could pivot a career. A partner calls, excited. In the head, a carousel of differences runs. Failure scenarios, debt, time lost, shame. The person researches for 6 months. They find reasons to wait for the perfect time. Meanwhile, the partner moves on. The person consoles themselves. I did the right thing. Not everyone is cut out for risk. They keep their job. Years pass. The person looks back with a quiet, corrosive grief that sounds like, I always knew I couldn't. That grief is not just emotional, it is a small death. Why do so many people endlessly research? Because research is a socially acceptable way to postpone. It looks like wisdom. It tastes like motion while actually being avoidance. The mind manufactures legitimacy. The body drinks the avoidance like water. The result is life stayed small for the illusion of safety. Scene 3. The generous impulse turned punitive. Someone receives an unexpected profit from a side hustle. They want to celebrate with a friend. The impulse hits, but immediately shame appears. I shouldn't celebrate when others are struggling. The person gives the money away anonymously or spends it on a tax-deductible donation. They feel morally upright, but privately they feel hollow. Giving as penance is common among people who feel guilty for receiving. It feels noble. It also cements the idea that prosperity must be paid for with suffering. Notice the pattern across these scenes. The thought generates a feeling. The feeling generates a behavior. The behavior produces an outcome that the thought can point to as validation. If you watch carefully, you will see the mechanism is not about the bank balance. It is about the stories we carry and the rituals that support them. Now see the same loop in other domains. A romantic partner suggests a small trip. The scarcity mind calculates opportunity cost until the trip becomes not worth it. The relationship loses a chance to deepen. A business owner refuses to hire because payroll feels like a permanent liability. The owner burns out and never scales. A parent refuses small acts of abundance for their children, just in case. And those children grow into adults who inherit the same nervous system. The loop spreads outward and writes a script for entire families. The reflexive logic is always compelling. It paints itself as protection. The believer feels clever. That cleverness is the talisman that hides shame. The talisman is named realism or responsibility. It excludes joy. That's the cruelty. The soul that wants to live is told that living is indulgent. Living is taxed by inner authorities who say you do not deserve it. Let me be blunt. Scarcity is an identity architecture. It builds rituals, rules, and liturgies. Never touch windfalls. Always have 3 months saved. Only invest what you can afford to lose. On their face, these are reasonable. In practice, they become prayers to a wrong God. They keep you obedient to fear. The architecture is cleverly moral. You can posture as virtuous while your life narrows. Now watch how the loop reinforces itself statistically. Every cautious choice reduces the variance of outcomes. That feels stable. But variance is where growth lives. If you compress variance to 0, you also compress upside. The person survives. They rarely thrive. When an opportunity requires a small exposure, it becomes invisible. Over time, their world becomes a corridor of predictability. That corridor feels safe. It also feels small. You might think this is mostly about money. It is not. It is about identity, voice, and the nervous system's permission to be seen. Scarcity rewires what you accept for yourself. It changes your calendar, your posture, the way you speak to loved ones. The person who lives by scarcity often hoards attention and approval like coins. They are stingy with compliments. They ration celebration. They ration vulnerability. That is the social cost. I want to give you 2 real-life sketches because stories land this mechanic where an argument does not. The first is Anna. You remember her from earlier. She saved obsessively, then sold a project and received a surprising bonus. Her first reaction was tears of disbelief. Her second reaction was to return most of it to saving within days. She told herself she was being wise. Inside, she felt like a thief. She could not receive. The body had been trained not to accept. This training cost her small experiments of joy that would have recalibrated her feeling of deserving. The second is Carlos, the consultant. He ran everything alone to avoid payroll. His talent was throttled by his fear. When he finally hired an assistant, revenue doubled in 3 months. The cost was immediate and visible. The very thing he liquidified to avoid payroll was what allowed him to scale. His fear had been the boundary that kept his business small. He had worshipped control and punished possibility. Both of these stories show a crucial point. The loop is not about intelligence. Both are smart. Both are capable. The loop is about what a person uses. In the next section, I will describe the moment when this loop collapses or opens into awakening. I will show the kinds of shocks that make people finally notice the pattern they have been running for decades. I will explain why those moments are brutal and why they also contain possibility. If you have tolerated the loop for years, get ready. The story ahead will be uncomfortable. It will also be clarifying. Stay with me. Patterns escalate. They do not remain stationary. Small rituals pile up until the ledger of life reads differently than the ledger in your head. That accumulation eventually hits a threshold. The threshold is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It is quiet and undeniable. It arrives as exhaustion, as the exact realization that despite all your care you have not created the life you say you wanted. That is the moment of rupture, the point of break, where the loop either collapses into despair or cracks open into lucidity. I want you to feel how the build accumulates. Imagine years of postponing pleasures. Each deferred joy is a tiny interest on a debt to yourself. The interest compounds. You go from, I will travel when, to, I don't travel because. You go from, I will start my business when, to, I never had the time. The ledger of unlivened experiences reads longer and longer. One day you look and the present is a stranger. The voice that guided you is still noble sounding. The life, however, looks like a series of careful missed chances. The breaking point often arrives as an image in the mirror. I have watched people recalibrate when they calculate, not money, but time. They run the numbers and realize that the carefulness that was supposed to guarantee some future security has bought them only repetitions. The math is cruel. Decades of small savings do not necessarily equal a life well lived. That realization is not arithmetic. It is moral and existential. It feels like betrayal. You rebel against yourself with sudden clarity. There are other triggers. A relationship may fracture because you refused small gestures. A child may express bewilderment at your scarcity rituals. A health scare will strip away abstract futures and force choices today. Or you simply watch peers not luckier, only more willing, living and investing in themselves. Comparison is not always poisonous. It can be a mirror that reveals your own misdirected prudence. When the rupture happens, there are two roads. One is collapse. Collapse looks like resignation and bitterness. The person doubles down on their old certainty and moralizes more loudly. They write entire manifestos on prudence and how others are reckless. Their voice hardens. Their world shrinks. It is a curse disguised as consistency. The other road is awakening. Awakening looks like horror and relief at once. Horror because you finally see how much you have rationed your life. Relief because recognition opens the possibility of a different method. Awakening is not gentle. It often arrives as pain, anger at your younger self, grief for what was missed, shame at how you treated the people you love. These feelings are heavy. They are necessary. They indicate that the old pattern is losing its grip. Let me describe two different rupture stories so you can feel the difference between collapse and awakening. The first is a man I will call Roberto. He was the epitome of prudence. He could justify anything, from skipping anniversaries to declining investments in learning. He ended up with modest savings and a life of small comforts but large regrets. When his company went through a restructuring and he was offered early retirement, he celebrated by telling friends he had won at prudence. Inside, he felt hollow. He doubled down on threeness of emergency funds and spent the rest of his days critical of those he considered frivolous. That was collapse by moralization. The second is Helena. She hit a different floor. At 52, she found herself painfully aware that she had never taken a month alone, never learned the language she wanted, never spent money on the crafter of her own happiness. A quiet fury rose that was not about blame, but about possibility. She began, slowly, to spend small amounts on classes, to accept invitations she had once declined, to practice receiving compliments without qualifying them. She did not do this out of irresponsibility. She did it as a series of experiments. Over 2 years, her nervous system softened. The inner voice still whispered fear, but the new actions gave enough counter-evidence that fear lost authority. Helena walked through rupture into learning. This is important. Rupture does not guarantee transformation. It only makes transformation possible. The work that follows is brutal and necessary. You must trace how the original pattern began. You must face the earliest messages you received about money and worth. You must locate the rituals that rehearse fear and interrupt them. That is the labor of repair. It is not fast. It is concrete. I will give you the structure of that repair. First, you must witness. Witnessing is not self-blame. It is honest inventory. You list where your life resembles an anxious ledger. You note the relationships that have withered and the opportunities that have been declined. You do this with curiosity, not condemnation. Second, you must design micro-experiments. Not vows, not manifestos, but measured tests. Spend 5% of a windfall on something that brings joy and record what happens. Hire a small help for 1 month and see how output changes. Apply to one program and commit to only the application, not the outcome. Third, you must practice receiving. This is mechanical work. Allow compliments without turning them into confessions. Accept gifts and feel the physical sensation that arises. Note the story that surfaces. Name it. Then choose another thought and let the body register another possibility. These are the elementary acts that reteach the nervous system to be safe when resources flow. Fourth, you must adopt a new narrative about money and worth. Not a slogan, a lived sentence. For some it might be, money is energy that moves through me. For others, I am permitted to receive and to create value. Pick a short phrase and use it as a decision anchor when the old voice speaks. The phrase is not magical. It is legal tinder for a different kind of practice. You must also accept loss in this process. Some of your old securities will fall away. People who once praised your prudence may resist your new experiments. You will be accused of irresponsibility. Expect resistance. The old pattern has social allies. Those allies will feel threatened by your change. That is normal. Do not take it as proof you are wrong. There is a practical economy to this repairing work. You will need boundaries. You will require small commitments that provide clear feedback. You will need to schedule practice like a muscle routine. This is not glamorous. It looks like spreadsheets and receipts, but it is intimate work on the same level as therapy or physical rehab. And it is the only reliable path from rupture to rebuilding. One more truth. The earliest acts after rupture matter more than grand gestures. I have seen people try to fix 20 years with a single large vacation or an expensive purchase. It rarely heals. The nervous system does not reconfigure because of occasional indulgence. It reconfigures because of regular, repeated, modest acts that contradict the old script. Think of it as recalibrating the thermostat, not flipping a switch. Finally, I must warn you about impatience. People who move from rupture to practice often demand too much evidence, too fast. They expect immediate transformation. When it does not arrive, they either give up or overcompensate. The wiser path is incremental courage. A weekly small permission, a monthly experiment, a yearly risk that stretches you without shattering you. Over time, the accumulation of these acts changes your axis. If you have already felt the rupture, you are at a critical edge. There is an urgent choice in front of you. You can seal yourself with more rules and make your life into a fortress. Or you can use the rupture as a hinge and allow a new script to start. The hinge is practice. The hinge is small and obstinate. The hinge is the only reliable ally in this work. In the next part, one will give you that hinge, the specific new pattern, and the ritual that begins to rewire your life. If you are tired of keeping a ledger of withheld joys, listen closely. The work ahead is specific, repeatable, and doable. It asks you to spend, to receive, and to witness without collapsing into old guilt. It is not soft. It is not naive. It is the exact opposite of the habit that trapped you. If you are ready to break the costume you have worn for decades, I will show you how to start taking it off. It trains your nervous system to register receiving as safe. Here is how you begin. Pick an amount that feels slightly daring but harmless. For some readers it is 20. For others it is 100. It should make your inner voice murmur, not scream. Set aside this sum once a week. Put it in a discreet envelope, a designated account, or a labeled card. The container matters. It signals intention. On the day, slow down. Before you spend, close your eyes for a breath and ask, what would bring genuine pleasure or expansion with this money? Be concrete. Choose something that is not purely utilitarian. It can be a book you will read, a plant for your home, a cooking class, a modest dinner with a friend where conversation matters. The aim is emotional exposure, not conspicuous consumption. Spend it. Notice every micro thought that arises: guilt, calculation, comparison, the old script about undeservedness. Name the thought aloud or in your head. For example, there it is, I should save this. Then say a counter thought, a simple re-anchor. Money moves through me and creates value. Repeat the anchor as you make the purchase. Let the body feel the choice in real time. After the purchase, do not bury the experience. Record 2 lines in a small notebook. First line, what you bought and why. Second line, how your body felt during and after the act. Were you lighter? Ashamed? Neutral? This writing trains your attention to register evidence. Over weeks, the entries will show a pattern. Patterns are what change neural habits. There are structural rules that prevent sabotage. Rule 1. Do not compensate. If you spend the ritual money, do not then punish yourself by freezing another budget line. That is the old loop trying to reassert itself. Rule 2. Allow the pleasure without explanation. You do not need to justify. Rule 3. Increase the sum slowly, only when the nervous system tolerates it. This is progressive overload for the psyche. Expect resistance. Expect friends and family to object. Expect the inner voice to call your new practice irresponsible. That's precisely the point. The old pattern has social allies. Some people will compliment your thrift and then judge your new experiments. That will be loud at first. Notice who reacts and why. Their reaction is data about how invested others are in your old identity. This ritual is a learning protocol, not a therapy shortcut. It does 3 things at once. It generates new evidence, experiencing receiving without catastrophe. It weakens the old script by creating counterexamples. And it trains attention to notice the tiny cognitive moves that used to be automatic. Each week of practice is a controlled experiment where you are both scientist and subject. I want to give you practical scaffolding beyond the ritual itself. First, set a reporting rhythm. Once a month, review your notebook entries. Look for shifts, less guilt, more curiosity, different language. Second, create a micro-boundary. Tell one trusted person what you are doing, not for permission, for accountability and witness. Third, design an if-then fallback. If you feel the urge to compensate after a spend, pause and say, I will wait 1 hour and journal first. That delay is enough to interrupt the autopilot. Now, let's anchor this with real people I have watched. Anna, who we met earlier, behaved like a rain check on life. When she received a surprising windfall, she returned most of it to savings within days. Her body had been trained to convert receiving into anxiety. For her version of the ritual, I asked for one small deviation, a visible, irreducible enjoyment. She booked a single pottery class for herself. She kept a photo of the cup she made. The cup was ugly. She loved it. The photo became proof that receiving did not break her. Over months, those photos accumulated into a quiet dossier of evidence that reshaped her nervous system. Carlos, the consultant, had a different problem. He worshipped control. He thought of payroll like a permanent wound. The ritual for him started with delegation. I asked him to hire a virtual assistant for 4 weeks, and to budget the pay as a ritual expenditure. He felt like he was giving money away. The first week his inner voice roared. The second week, he discovered he had time to write proposals. The third week, he closed a client that doubled his monthly revenue. The ritual remained small for weeks, but its effect was structural. He had spent money and received multiplied returns. The nervous system began to register not loss, but circulation. These stories show two important variations. One is about receiving pleasure. The other is about investing in expansion. Your ritual can and should alternate between those modes. Week 1, joy. Week 2, capacity. Week 3, relationship. Week 4, surprise. The diversity of experiences ensures the nervous system learns that money enables a wider range of life, not just risk. You also need language to repel old narratives. Pick a short sentence you can say when scarcity speaks. Something concrete like, I permit this flow, or this money creates life. Use it out loud. The phrase becomes legal tender for a new habit. It is not spiritual fluff. It is cognitive plumbing. Part of reprogramming is readiness to lose the applause of your past allies. When you change, some people will call you reckless. Do not mistake their alarm for truth. Their alarm is a mirror of their own fear. You are permitted, legally and ethically, to choose a different script. Do not beg for permission from those who profit emotionally from your old smallness. There are practical guardrails to keep you honest. Keep the ritual separate from essentials like rent and medicine. This is exposure, not gambling. Track results with a simple sheet. Date, amount, category, feeling before, feeling after, one concrete result in the next 30 days. After 3 months, review. If nothing has changed, adjust the size, the category, or the anchor phrase. Experimentation requires curiosity, not compulsion. Finally, expect relapse. The old script will not cede power quietly. It will test you with market fluctuations, family crises, and your own mood. When relapse comes, do not narrate it as failure. Treat it as data. Ask, which trigger flipped me? Which part of the ritual did I skip? Which story did I start believing again? Answering these questions is how you refine the practice. If you do this work, small exposures, consistent review, language anchors, you will begin to notice a subtle redirection. Your attention will stop scanning for scarcity. You will start to see provisional opportunities. The nervous system will, slowly, allow the possibility of receiving as normal. That is the hinge. That is the architecture on which a new life grows. But patterns are social. You cannot do this in isolation entirely. You will need to negotiate new boundaries with those around you. Some relationships will recalibrate, others will resent. That is part of the cost of growth. Expect it. Plan for it. Decide who you will allow to influence your financial choices. Choose witnesses who ask curious questions, not moral ones. The ritual is the hinge. It will not solve everything, but it fixes the place where most people are stuck, receiving and allowing. And when that opens, other doors start to loosen. Small acts of receiving train a larger tolerance for risk. Those increased tolerances make real opportunities visible. That is how the loop begins to reverse. Next, I will show you what life looks like when that hinge has turned. I will show early wins and nasty setbacks. I will give examples of how the new pattern compounds. If you are tired of living behind rules, watch carefully. Transformation is incremental, but it is visible. And if you are not ready for practice, at least listen to the evidence I am about to lay out. It will tell you whether your present course is sustainable. What happens when the ritual is applied for months, for a year, for a decade? The answer is not mystical. It is practical and measurable, and it begins to look like a different life. Stay with me. When you change the small thing repeatedly, the world starts to respond differently. The change is not theatrical. It is micro. At first, you notice fewer stomach knots when you check your balance. Then you notice opportunities you used to discount. The arc is slow but cumulative. I will map the sequence for you so you can recognize it in your own life. Week 1 to week 4 is mostly nervous system rehearsal. You show up, You spend the ritual amount. You register your feeling. The first month yields micro-evidence, an easier breath, a moment of pleasure. Month 3 is different. Patterns emerge. You can point to specific decisions that felt. There are setbacks that test the new pattern. A client disappears. A health scare requires immediate expenses. Old scripts that say, "See, I was right to be cautious," will appear. The practice is to notice the script and choose again. It is surgical. You name the thought, anchor an alternative, and then take the small next step that contradicts the old story. That is how resilience grows. A crucial piece of evidence is the difference between elective scarcity and enforced scarcity. Elective scarcity is the choice to live small. Enforced scarcity is a real lack of resources. The problem is that elective scarcity often masquerades as prudence. When you reprogram, you discover which constraints are real and which are narrative. That clarity alone changes decisions and outcomes. Here's a common test. An unexpected client pays you twice your usual rate. The scarcity mind has a dozen stories ready. I will lose it next month. Taxes will eat it. Others will judge me. The practicing mind says, I will allocate a portion to growth, a portion to gratitude, and a portion to safety. The distribution matters. It trains discretion instead of panic. Over time, that distribution becomes your default. Another visible effect is on relationships. People who live by scarcity often hoard generosity. They ration compliments and favors. When they practice receiving and purposeful spending, generosity follows. They begin to give time and resources more freely because their internal pool feels replenishable. This changes how they are perceived. It also makes community a source of expansion rather than threat. Professionally, the difference is dramatic. I have seen solo founders cross a plateau once they allowed payroll. The hesitancy around cost becomes the bottleneck that keeps talent away. Hire and your output increases. Invest in learning and you open new markets. The ritual trains you to tolerate the temporary weight of cost to reach structural leverage. That is growth strategy, not frivolity. But there is a social friction that accompanies this new orientation. Your old allies may accuse you of waste. They will mistake your experiments for vanity. Plan for that. You will need to explain less and choose companions who celebrate practice over posture. That is not selfishness. It is triage of influence. I want to give you concrete markers to know if the practice is working. Marker 1. You spend without immediately compensating. Marker 2. You notice your language shift from "I can't afford" to "I choose to allocate." Marker 3. You are willing to pilot investments where outcomes are uncertain. Marker 4. Your calendar contains acts of nourishment that you previously deferred. If you have 2 or 3 of these markers, the practice is changing your life. There will also be common traps. The first is conflating spending with transformation. You can buy experiences and still be emotionally stingy. The second is one-off grand gestures intended to fix decades. The nervous system rewires by repetition, not spectacle. The third trap is moralizing your new behavior. Do not become a new moralist who judges others for their caution. Growth requires humility. The ritual is a private laboratory, not a pulpit. A practical tactic I give people is this 60-day diversity protocol. For 60 days, allocate your ritual amount across 5 categories: pleasure, learning, capacity, relationship, surprise. Track emotional output for each category. You will find some categories are friction-filled and others easeful. That pattern tells you where the nervous system needs more evidence. If receiving pleasure is hard, do more pleasure. If investing in capacity elicits panic, reduce the amount but increase frequency. Adjust with curiosity. Let me be blunt about money math. Small repeated acts compound psychologically in ways that look like compound interest monetarily. A person who spends $50 weekly on skill building may not see immediate ROI, but over a year, that investment yields capabilities that open new revenue streams. The practice turns time into a runway, not a trap. That runway is how possibility arrives. Now consider identity. The person who lives by scarcity often defines themselves as responsible. The new identity is not irresponsible, but steward. Stewardship assumes circulation and investment, not hoarding. It assumes that resources are stewarded to create life, not preserved to avoid risk. This is a moral reframing. It matters because identity frames decisions almost automatically. I want to offer a few troubleshooting scenarios because you will need them. If the inner voice escalates into paralysis, reduce the ritual amount and increase the frequency. Smaller, consistent exposures beat occasional spectacles. If you are punished socially, rehearse a short script. I'm testing a different posture toward resources. I'm not asking for approval. If you hit a financial emergency, pause the ritual and resume as soon as the immediate crisis stabilizes. The point is practice, not perfection. Let me close this section with an image. Imagine your life as a garden. Scarcity, people plant a few seeds and then hide them under glass, afraid the birds will take them. The new posture waters, weeds, and occasionally spends money on a better spade. The harvest is not guaranteed, but the probability increases with skilled tending. That tending is the ritual. In the next section, I will ask you the most important question of all. Where are you in this arc? Are you still entertaining the old voice? Or have you begun to collect small proofs that the world responds to different attention? I will also give you a micro protocol to apply in the next 24 hours that will make your answer clearer. If you want change, you will be forced to notice. If you don't, nothing will compel you. Which will you choose? Here is the simple, unavoidable truth I want you to carry. Scarcity is not primarily an external ledger. It is an internal law you obey. You obey it by what you think, by what you feel, and by the tiny rituals you repeat. It takes time to notice this because the rituals are polite. They look like prudence. They sound like responsibility. They feel like moral virtue. But they are habits. And habits are reversible. I will not sentimentalize the work. You will lose some comforts when you change. People who praised your thrift may be displeased. You will feel guilt. You will feel awkward. You will be tempted to present the change as a sudden windfall or miracle. Do not. Transparency and small evidence are your allies. Tell one person what you are testing. Keep the rest private until the result accumulates. Now the micro step I ask of you. For the next 24 hours, track every time your thought leans toward, I can't. It's too expensive, or not worth it. Do not lecture yourself. Do not fix anything. Just tally. At the end of the day, write the total number of scarcity thoughts and one example that surprised you. This crude audit is the single most clarifying action I give you. It costs nothing. It reveals the magnitude of the voice that governs you. If you choose one more small protocol, make it a scheduled ritual. Pick one day this week for the conscious spending exercise. Choose your amount. Prepare a short anchor phrase. Spend and then record. That's it. 2 practices, noticing and a single small exposure. If you do nothing else this month, do these 2 things. You may ask, what about emergencies? What about real scarcity? I am not arguing irresponsibility. Emergencies are real. The difference is that responsible planning is not the same as fearful hoarding. Responsible planning sets contingencies with clear metrics. Fearful hoarding evacuates possibility. Do both if you wish. Hold an emergency fund and also allocate a small, non-negotiable portion of life to expansion and joy. That dual system is maturity, not contradiction. There is a structural psychology to adopt as you begin. When scarcity arises, perform a quick 3-step protocol. 1. Name the fear aloud. 2. Ask the calibration question, is this true now or a story about the future? 3. Choose the smallest actionable opposite. This micro protocol forces the system into inquiry rather than default contraction. Over time, the inquiry becomes the habit. The moral language is important. Do not frame receiving as sin. Do not frame spending as indulgence. Reframe both as ethical choices about how you steward your life. Think in terms of allocation. Ask, what allocation now increases the probability of the life I want? That reframing yields clearer action. I must be blunt about timelines. Nothing I said will erase decades of habituation overnight. Expect the change curve. Where are you in the story I just told? Are you the person who still measures life by the ledger in the head? Or are you the person who, despite fear, begins to test, to receive, and to allocate for growth? I ask it plainly because most of my work is with people who thought they were prudent and discovered they were obedient to fear. It is a sad but honest truth. If you recognized yourself, take the 2 small steps now. The 24-hour audit and 1 conscious spending exercise this week. Do them privately if you must. Do them even if you feel ashamed. Evidence is the antidote to story. When you gather evidence, your nervous system can change its mind. Before I sign off, a short note. If this video landed for you, if parts of it felt like uncomfortable truth, I want you to do one tiny public act. In the comments, tell us your city and country and one small insight you noticed after the 24-hour audit. No moralizing, no performance, just data. It helps the community realize they are not alone. And if you like this work, subscribe to stay with the series. I'm building toward practices that map different kinds of scarcity traps and how to dismantle them. Your presence matters. Finally, remember this. Scarcity is not a fact of the world. It is a pattern you have learned. Patterns can be unlearned. It begins with seeing the pattern, then with tiny betrayals of the voice that has governed you. The betrayals are courageous because they are small. They do not make headlines. They change your life. Do the audit. Spend that modest amount. Record how you feel. Repeat. Over months, you will have created a different ledger, one of experiments and evidence. That ledger will, quietly, rewire how the world shows up for you. Thank you for staying with this work. I won't sugarcoat the labor. It is long and stubborn and often lonely. But it is real. It is the only reliable path from a life of careful avoidance to one of practiced receiving. Choose one small practice today. The rest is patience and honesty.